Welcome to Comic Books and You. Today we're going to be doing something very different. We're actually going to be looking at the official handbook of the Conan universe, dating 1986 by Marvel. It's one of my older books. That's not a reprint. There are a few reprints of this, but I actually have the original in front of me here. It's a very comprehensive guide to the Conan universe. If you wanted to write for Conan, that would be a very nice book for you to have. Of course, this is a Marvel book, so it includes the Marvel ideas and the Marvel things inside of it. So you do have things like Red Sonja, which is not originally part of the Conan canon, basic. It merges everything fairly well together, and even if you were going on a limb and knew what to avoid in terms of the Marvel pit traps, you would be able to work on this. Conan has been in comics for the longest time. Originally, from what I found, it was first published as comics in Mexico with the Queen of the Black Coast. And then in the 1970s, well, early 1970 to be exact, Marvel kind of got a deal with Conan going on. It was not really a purchase of the property. It was a purchase of a license of the property, more or less, from what I understand. There are better Conan historian on the internet. I mean, Midnight's Edge has made a great video, well, actually more than one, on Conan, and you can easily find more details there. Currently, the Conan license is with Titan Comics, and it's written by Jim Zub, who is a lover of the character and a lover of the universe. So it's a great person to keep it going. Marvel had the license for the longest time, then Dark Horse had it for a little bit, published a few different stories, and then Marvel got it back, and now Titans has it. Pretty sure modern Disney Marvel would have no idea what to do with Conan or with any of the characters associated with it. So here we're going to go, not page by page or whatever. I've still followed a bit of the concepts I usually use. We're going to look at some of the characters that are introduced in this particular handbook. We're going to look at different settings and different things and just talk about Howard and his work, because that's really the main focus of this book. More than the Marvel portion of the Conan verse, this is more of a retrospect of what Howard would have wanted in a way, but through the lens of the creators at Marvel who actually respected the Conan mythos quite a bit. Another great thing about Conan is the fact that we basically cover his entire life through the various stories. He really started his adventuring days raiding a Aquilonian city, and over the years, I mean, he was a pirate, he was a Cossack, he was a mercenary leader, he was just a mercenary soldier, he was a slave, he was a slave revolt leader. Conan did it all, basically, in his long and fruitful life, mostly, ending with him being the king of Aquilonia after basically taking the throne from a corrupt lord. So it's very nice to have a character that did all of this, and it allows you to just toss him into any kind of situation and remain the main character in his stories. I sometimes joke that Conan is basically a sitcom. Well, if you take the rules of sitcom, that's basically what it is. I mean, Conan is our main character, and he walks around, gets into a place, causes a disturbance, or something disturbs him, and over time he fixes it, and he goes back to what he was before. There's actually very little character growth to Conan in the story itself. The character growth and his progression comes in between the stories and in between his various adventures. One of the most important characters in the Conan mythos is really Byleth, the Queen of the Black Coast, who was really Conan's true love. We got to see her once in the Howard stories. She has more impressions if you look through the different Marvel stories, because she was around with Conan for quite a period of time. She does die a horrible death in the story she was introduced in, and that makes her a little bit more of a tragic figure, even though she is a pirate queen and a mighty warrior on her own. It is interesting that Conan always comes back to thinking about her as well, even though he has, like I said, a long and fruitful life. She is one of the women you can't really forget. But what happens when you kill a character that is actually interesting and that is relevant to your character? Well, at some point, you create a second character that's exactly the same. We've seen that a lot in things like Bambaran, and we've seen that in other French bande dessinée. It's actually a trope in many of those pulp stories where the hero is static, but the rest of the universe moves around him. Valeria she's a different character than Baelith, but if you think about it, in the end, she is also a pirate. She is also headstrong. She has a lot of the same characteristics of Baelith while also being her own character. But this is like I said, an issue that you have every once in a while in these kinds of stories. Howard didn't want to go with flashbacks or intensive flashbacks or anything like that, or people coming back from the dead. Back in those days, that would have been looked at fairly poorly. So Valeria is another fairly important character, but unlike Baelith, she doesn't die a horrible death, and she has her own adventures on the side. Marvel took Red Sonja from a different story written by Howard, a story about siege of a Hungarian city. Completely different setup, different background and everything. They basically just took the name and the basic figure and introduced her into the Conan mythos. That's why if you ever read any Conan outside of Marvel, you won't have Red Sonja. Right now, she is the star of her own comic. I can't remember who's the company who currently owns the rights to Red Sonja. There is a Red Sonja movie coming in the near future. Midnight's Edge has good hopes for it. Most of the other people don't, because we're living in 2023, 2024. She's pretty much as popular as Conan nowadays. And like I said, she has her own books, her own series, and she's probably one of the original bad girls of comics that we have looked at a little bit recently with Niobe, Mary Machine Gun, and probably other Niobe and Antarctic Press comic. I was going to say Atlantic Press again. My bad. What's fun about Red Sonja here, she has her original origin story, which is supernatural compared to Conan, who is purely natural. So we have a bit of a dichotomy between those two characters in that regards. Marvel has changed her origin, and I think everybody who's worked with her keep trying to change her origin to make her more of a feminist icon. Really, it doesn't work with what we're supposed to work with here. In the Conan universe, the feminist icon just doesn't work. I mean, you have to play with the tropes you're given in these kinds of situations. We get a small bit of information on Tranikos, who's a Howard character from an unpublished story, which was actually refined and finished up by Spag de Camp. It's not a direct adversary of Conan because they don't live in the same time frame, but Conan goes and tries to steal Tranikos' treasure, and even Conan is not able to get it, which is a bit surprising because Conan generally succeeds in these kinds of endeavors. Tranikos was an evil pirate who raided, pillaged, and destroyed things. And in order to make sure that his treasure was kept, he brought it to Pictland, massacred a Pict tribe to be able to hide it in a cave there. But a shaman summoned the demon that trapped Tranikos and his pirate captains in the cave. A bit of an odd, very supernatural story, but it does work in the general Conan ideas. And having Conan not directly fight him, but try to search for another pirate's treasure, it's a very basic trope, but it works really well. Finally, we are going to have to talk about the Kosakis. We have a nice introduction to the characters in the handbook. The Kosakis are basically what would in the modern day be called the Cossacks, those Asian steppe lords who raided and lived free in Eastern Europe, in Russia, and they're basically regarded throughout the Conan universe as bandits, raiders, and all around freemen while the entire world is enslaved to their civilization or their tribes. It reflects a lot what we'd see in also the cowboy stories of Howard and Howard's era, as the free men on horseback able to go just about anywhere. Conan being a leader of the Cossack is fairly important in many stories, and in many Marvel stories as well. We see him with various Cossack leaders and Cossack warriors trying to rescue people, trying to liberate cities from dictatorial lords, rescuing slaves, another very important thing here. We have one or two stories I remember from Howard about the Cossacks and Conan with the Cossacks. So it's an expansion of what our good friends Howard had written at the start. And truly, we do have a nice little section on Kull the Conqueror as well, which in Howard's story, not real history, was the king of Atlantis. He's basically a proto-Conan. He's got not the exact same background, but the exact same path through life. A mighty leader, a mighty warrior. Everything's on a grander scale when you're dealing with Kull, however, than when you're dealing with Conan, because in the Atlantean myth and in the Atlantean stories Howard was building, Atlantis was that much larger and more powerful civilization, much more magic involved, much more strange creatures, the lizard men and things like that are kind of associated with Conan nowadays. We're more into Kull stories than into Conan stories. As such, Marvel did have the rights to Kull, and I think they did a few comics and talked about it, but it's not what really drove the sales. But I'm always interested in reading more stories by Howard, especially as he mastered his trade of sword and sorcery. The back flap of this book is a fairly nice index, which is nice in a handbook, but with how small this handbook really is, and it being in complete alphabetical order, I'm not sure it's the most important thing. If it was from, most important to least important or anything along those lines, maybe it would be a little bit more important. The thing is, what would you put on that back flap? Would you put an ad for the upcoming Conan book? Well, if you did that, that would make this handbook very timely rather than timeless. So it wouldn't be as good. Probably no government sponsored ads or any other regular ads you would see in books of those days would really fit with this particular concept of an handbook. So I think this was probably the best thing to do. What is really, really interesting, however, is looking at the names at the top. Editor-in-Chief Jim Shooter. I mean, we are still talking about Jim Shooter. Every other week, Mark Millar or anybody in those circle keeps saying, like, yeah, we need editors-in-chief and editors like Jim Shooter back into business. Current editors and editors-in-chief just don't know what they're doing, and that's a fact. Then we have editor Larry Hama. You remember Larry Hama? He's also the one who did the G.I. Joes. And the recent G.I. Joe revival is also from him, and also working on the Transformer revival at Image. So that's a guy that's still around and still quite competent at it. The researcher and written by is a name I do not know. All the artists being put in there are also all very big names, with John Buscema being at the top. He was the one who basically codified Conan. He was the main artist on Conan for the longest time, and is what gave Conan its distinctive look. Another nice bit in this book is the Robert Irvin Howard introduction. Basically, it gives us the key points about Howard's life and about his work in the Iborian Age and the pre-cataclysmic age. It does say that he was a great storyteller. It does say that he had a lot of imagination. So it's one of the better interpretation of Howard. If you start reading various books and various dissertations, you will notice that there's really two points of view on Howard. One was that he was a genius, and the other one was that he was a hack. That particular acquisition is more espoused by one Stephen King, who is a hack himself, so I'm not sure what that goes to say. I do believe Howard was a great storyteller and a great creator, probably in the same vein as Tolkien, in a way. The problem with Howard was that he was, unlike Tolkien, not from a wealthy or powerful family, so he had to make do with writing pulp and trying to live off of that. This particular short description ignores the fact that he committed suicide, which is kind of normal if we look at books related to comics and things like that. I mean, you wouldn't want kids to know how he really ended. I personally see Howard as one of the most modern writers of his time, probably even more modern and more refined than Tolkien in some ways, not in his mastery of the language or his development of things, but with how deep and how skilled he was at bringing different things together and actually creating a world that it was more than just fantasy Europe. Truly, this book is a world-building Bible. You've got everything you need to be able to write Conan stories through that, as long as it's through the Marvel lens. As you know, there's a few differences and few things that you have to be careful of if you ever are to write Conan stories. Basically, try to avoid anything that Howard didn't talk about. That's probably your smartest choice. Every important bit of the setting is explained in enough details in this book for you to be able to use. Same with enough details on the key characters for you to be able to use. But you, like I said, you do have to be a little bit careful when doing so, as Marvelisms are bound to get in. This book also represents a lot of historical inaccurate accuracies, that I kind of want to say. Howard made sure that his world worked internally, and his idea of medieval fantasy was a bit wide, let's say. Technological level between the different factions in the different nation vary widely, and you're going to have basic barbarian in the north and fully armored modern knights in the south. Arabs basically using what would only be represented as Renaissance weapons. So you're a little bit everywhere in terms of equipment, in terms of how people are behaving and equipped to go to war. Does it break your immersion or does it do anything like that? No, definitely not, because Conan just works. Conan, you just insert him into any situation in any location, and he will be able to behave like he normally does and bring his own righteous force to the situation. Here we have a nice collection of different weapons from the Conan age, and you can see there the variety here, which would have brought like early Renaissance weapon, but you've got crude axe, straight swords, which would be from earlier time. You've got a crossbow, which is a fairly modern weapon once you start thinking about it. So you really have a little bit of everything in there. A little bit of the same with siege weaponry that is shown in this book. A lot of what we see here would be Roman era, but then you have some stuff in there that is closer to late medieval. It doesn't really matter because in the world of Conan, it works. Conan will just show up and use the weapon that he needs to use to be able to move the story forward. Real quick, we are going to discuss the actual world-building elements we see in this, but at first we need to discuss how it is done today. And by this era, I don't mean just in American comics. French bande dessinée has that issue. Manga is the biggest culprit of this particular issue, actually. In most of the modern fantasy stories, we have two sides. The kingdom of good Gaizia, where diversity and inclusion is celebrated and democratic ideals exist and everybody's at peace and everybody's working together. Whatever modern day thing is going on and whatever modern day ideology needs to be pushed, it's on this side. And you're going to have, an homosexual general and transgender prince. Everything is going to be on that side. And it's the good side because the good things come from there. And the bad guys are the Empire of Bad Guysland. They are all the same ethnicity, generally white, because that's who you can target. In Avatar: The Last Airbender, they were Chinese, still a valid target. They encouraged things like slavery and not modern day things like, having strong family units and stuff like that. Basically, they're Nazis with a different coat of paint. That's what we see in these types of stories. Now let's look at how Howard did it. So basically, he had to write a bunch of pulp story to make some money because he was broke and there wasn't that many opportunities for a guy in his particular shape and health. So before anything else, he went like, yeah, I need to make this somewhat realistic and base it off what I have as far as what I've read on Atlantis, supernatural prehistory. Yeah, I'll use that as a basis. I'll try to make everything a little bit logical and nation being like civilized and some people being more barbaric, and I'm going to even it out. Some people from the north, some people from the south. I'm not going to make one group of people completely evil, even though I will probably say like the Pict have a lot of evil shaman and Shem, the leaders there are kind of mean, but let's just see what history kind of looked like and I'll put my own twist on it. You can see that there was a bit of a difference in how it was set up. And this is the map that we ended up having for the Conan story in the Iborian Age. It's basically a reflection of prehistoric ideology that was prevalent at the time. You can look it up. A lot of Atlantis stories and a lot of weird cults did happen in the late 19th, early 20th century, where a mix of science and religion kind of meshed together and led to thinking that the universe basically was cyclical, etc. Things that probably inspired Howard more than he would want to state. But you can see that this is basically Europe, Asia, and Africa all melded together. And you've got the major nations where we have major nations nowadays. But this is the Marvel map. There's an official Conan map. They all kind of look the same. They have that same kind of ideas to it. And the countries are in the same location because Howard did give us a very good description of what he wanted. Howard didn't go as far as Tolkien and maybe even C.S. Lewis when building his old cosmology. He did take all the religions, especially the old pagan religions, and mashed them together into a more or less cohesive bunch that he applied on his world. One thing you need to know, especially when you look at a lot of early Howard stories, they're not that supernatural heavy. They're going to have mysterious things. They're going to have some weird ancient aliens. They're going to have some real evil wizards, but no direct discussion with a god and no dragon coming out of nowhere. You're going to have like really strange creatures like the winged apes and such, but nothing that's going to push the limit, let's say. Those were more in your call stories. When the gods are invoked in the Conan mythos, it's generally as we would or as they would call upon the gods of old. Crom is the most common name being brought up by Conan, and Crom is the opposite of a merciful god. He's basically the god of libertarianism, and I think that's the best way to see it. He gives you the tools you need to survive. Use them. You don't pray to Crom, you just know he exists, and that he's ready to laugh at you if you fail. Howard, and by consequent Marvel, created many countries for Conan to travel to, fight for and against, and even rule at some point. No nation is all good or all evil once you start digging into it. Hyperborea, generally, though, depicted as a more nasty place. Same with Pictland. Outside of that, not much you can say. The people are generally fine. It's the institution, the government, things like that, that is a bit more problematic. Civilization is generally viewed as a corrupting influence, where places where people can get rich and powerful, but they lose their natural edge. That's part of Howard's whole idea when you see of all of the books Fun thing as well here, Chimeria, where Conan comes from, is not a good place. And the people from Chimeria are not good per se. They're just more natural than the rest. It really gave them an opportunity to have a wide variety of people, opinion, even though, let's face it, Howard was very much of its time. There is very little actual racism in Conan outside of what you would expect in a story of that genre. Uber Chimerian Conan is superior to everyone else pretty much, and everybody is some level of degenerate or some level of not as advanced. Shem is just as corrupt as Aquilonia in the end, and if you look, it's always the leadership and always the rulers that are the real problems in most of those stories. All the other Northern Barbarian are also seen as dangerous, but in their own way, they can be friends to Conan as well because it's the people that really matter. Howard really had a love of self-reliance, and that's what he led them to write as many characters as being heroic while being barbarous or more violent, because it was their natural instincts against the civilizing forces and the things that were going to oppress them. The Picts are probably the only real tribe that's really depicted as absolute bad guys, demon worshippers, and complete degenerates. And here I mean degenerate in the original sense. They are degenerate humans. They are not as they should be. What we have, though, especially in the Marvel books and even now in the new Jim Zub run, we have opportunities to make the Pict look good as well. There are some good Pict. There are some good Pict tribes, and they're the ones who generally get beat up by the bad guys, and the other Picts try to pick on, basically. Here we've got Afghanistan, which would have been in the memory of Howard, as Afghanistan had been a mire for the British forces. Ophir, the one thing that was generally, at least in the original stories, depicted as evil was really sorcery and demoncraft. The supernatural was not meant to be good. It wasn't natural, so it was bad. That's literally part of what Howard was talking about. But in order to make it more marketable to modern audiences, and by modern I mean 1970s, 1980s audiences, magic had to be integrated a lot more into Conan mythos, often enough even as good things. Conan himself is very rarely seen as a magical character. Here we've got Vendia, which is actually India, Bosonia, which would be Eastern Europe, or the border of Eastern Europe. We've got, once again, more variety. We have a short introduction to the pre-Conan world in this book. We've got Atlantis and the pre-cataclysmic age, and it does represent that there's more to it than the stories we have in the Conan books. And it's often described in Conan that they know about that pre-cataclysmic age, but that the might of that time has been lost. Still more diversity here, Kitai, which is China, and the Barachan Islands, which are basically the pirate hideouts. It's nice to see that we have so much here. Honestly, I was late to the show to get into Conan. I did see and read a few Conan things when I was a kid. It's really when I got into my adult years that I got more into the character and read more of them and into it. And I really ate that Stephen King tried to throw shade at Howard back in the day, and that a lot of people are not viewing Conan as it should be, just seeing him as a big, mean old barbarian, which is not helped by the two Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. Sitting down and reading this particular handbook is a love letter to Conan and what Marvel actually did in honor of Howard. Back in those days, that's really what it was. You honored the source material. You did not try to change it or replace it. This is a thing that every Conan fan should own. You will find it at all sorts of price points, however, depending on if it's a reprint, if it's an original, if it's got a Canadian pricing on it or not. Look around, try to find one. It can range all the way from $250 Canadian to I've seen one at $120. Take your pick, depending on how much you're ready to spend on such a thing. So I thank you very much for listening to me for so long. I hope you guys have a nice rest of your day. Please like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you guys later. Bye-bye.